me and the buddies were sitting around in the shop, cruising Facebook Marketplace. And they're about an hour away from me. There's this Prius, $500 sitting in some guy's pasture. My wife was there, and she said, "You need to go buy that." "Oh, I don't know. I've got all these other projects going. I'll do it another time." And she basically made me go buy this Prius.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Horsepower Heritage. I'm Maurice Merrick. And greetings to all of you listening from places like Allentown, Pennsylvania, Caledonia, Michigan, Baytown, Texas, Bali, Indonesia, Falkenstein, Germany, and Torino, Italy. Now, as you know, I love the classics and I love piston power. But I've done shows on turbine-powered cars, and we've talked about airplanes, the space shuttle, and land speed record cars, and contemporary supercars from builders like the Arash Motor Company and Zinger Vehicles, all sorts of stuff. But you're about to hear me say something I never thought I would utter on this podcast. Today we're talking about the Toyota Prius. But wait, don't go just yet. Hear me out, because I'm talking about a very special Prius, and my guest is the die-hard car guy who built it. Brant Stephenson proudly hails from Oklahoma, the 6th largest crude oil producing state in the Union. But he owns multiple Toyota Priuses. Or is it Pri? I'm not quite sure, but anyway, it's the most popular gas-electric hybrid car in history, with over 5 million units sold worldwide since 1997. And Brant has one very special Prius, because it's powered by a General Motors LS V8, it's rear-wheel drive, and it'll smoke the tires in basically every gear. So today you're going to hear how Brant built this car, and the response of the Prius community might surprise you. And yes, there is a Prius community. Incidentally, I don't hate the Prius. I know I'm kind of damning it with faint praise here, but it's just they've never really been cool cars. I mean, they're appliances. But you know what? The VW Beetle was an appliance. The Austin Mini was an appliance. The Fiat 500 was an appliance. And it turns out they're also lovable cars. And people love their Priuses. And I actually really like the looks of the new Gen 5 Prius myself. I think Toyota hit a home run with that car. Now, before we get started, I want to ask you to please rate and review the show on your preferred podcast app and become a patron. Go to buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage, and you can contribute as little as $2 to support the show. You can make that a one-time gift or a monthly gift. Again, that's buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage, and there's a link in the show notes. You can just click on that. All right, you guys are going to love this story, I'm telling you. It's Brant Stephenson and the Prius SS. And that's coming up right after this. This episode of Horsepower Heritage is sponsored by Model Citizen Diecast. Maybe you can't afford that Shelby 289 Cobra or that Porsche 356 Speedster, but having a scale model on the shelf is easy with Model Citizen Diecast. They stock collector-grade scale models in 1/43rd scale, 1/18th scale, and even the massive 1/8th scale masterpieces from the Amalgam Collection. And if you use the promo code HERITAGE at checkout, they'll give you 10% off your order. Limitations apply. Just visit modelcitizendiecast.com and check out their great selection. From race cars to classic cars and everything in between. Model Citizen Diecast, because your inner child still wants to play with cars.
I'm pleased to be on with you. I like your show.
Oh, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah, well, I do a little bit of everything, but this story just struck me because you're just a regular guy doing regular guy car stuff, but what a fun swap. I mean, it probably surprises the heck out of people when you light those tires up.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, especially when I pull up with the cutouts closed, and I open the loud switch and let them roast. And yeah, people are very surprised.
That's awesome. Dude, I was sitting here thinking, I hope he still has the mohawk.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the mohawk's here to stay.
I love the Mohawk.
Oh, thank you.
You may have warrants.
There's a funny story behind that. All my life, I've had nothing but a buzz cut.
Really?
Just because my hair wants to stick up all the time.
Yeah.
I finally decided, let's just get a mohawk. That's supposed to stick up.
Right.
And yeah, within a couple days, I got pulled over. Of course, I was speeding. I deserved it. But the officer, first thing he asked me was, do you have any warrants? And I was so taken aback. Like, I've never been asked that in my life.
That's so funny. He profiled you.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, that's so funny. Is the Oklahoma State Patrol pretty strict on speeders?
Sometimes. I get warnings more than tickets.
I mean, you guys have a lot of wide open space and a lot of really straight interstate, right? It can be very monotonous.
Oh my goodness, yes. You could see just straight for miles and miles. If you want to go fast, you can see for a long ways to do it.
Oh, absolutely. It's cannonball country, right?
Yes. Yeah, traffic is low. I imagine this would be a nice, fast state for the cannonballers.
I mean, I've done cross-country trips in, around that part of the country, Arkansas, Texas, little parts of Oklahoma. You want to chew up as much mileage as possible because there's nothing to look at.
Yes.
The road is straight as an arrow, and it can lull you to sleep.
Yeah, it all looks the same.
And it's fun to go fast in a straight line, right? So.
Oh, sure it is.
Well, Brant, thanks for doing this. I'm really excited to have you on because the second that I saw your V8 Prius, I'm like, I got to talk to this madman.
Well, a sane person doesn't do that. That's for sure.
Definitely not. Either you're extremely bored or you got a couple screws loose, but God love you.
It might be a little of both.
Well, first of all, let's talk about your car guy background. Obviously, this is not your first rodeo. What other stuff have you built, and how did you kind of get into cars?
Well, I got into cars pretty much same as every other car guy. It all started with something I saw as a kid that just sparked my interest. I can still remember what it was. I drove past it every day on the school bus, and it was this old, beat up, broken down second gen Camaro, and I just thought that is the coolest thing ever. I want something like that. Of course, the guy wanted too much money for it, which is why it sat there for years, but I did end up getting one later.
Yeah, it's funny. Those guys see you coming a mile away, too, and they just love to play with you, don't they? Like, how many times do you think that they've had somebody knock on the door and ask about, hey, man, you want to get rid of that car? And then it's just cat and mouse from then on.
Yeah, you can't let them know you want it too bad. The price goes up.
Oh, that's for sure. I remember there was a guy that had a Pantera in his driveway. And this is the kind of house where, the paint's peeling, the lawn hasn't been mowed for like probably a year, and there's enough detritus in the yard where you can barely see the car. But I knew what it was immediately. And yeah, he just wasn't having it, man. Eventually, somebody offered him enough money because that car is no longer there, but it took years and years for somebody to finally make him the right offer.
Yeah, there's a lot of them that way. Actually, I had a kind of a hard time getting a hold of a second gen Camaro because for years they just weren't for sale because they were only worth $1,000.
Sure.
So everybody that had one in their yard, they're not letting it go for that. What it really took for those cars to gain some value, I think, was cash for clunkers. A lot of them disappeared around that time, at least in my area, and their value skyrocketed.
Yeah, people just wanted to be rid of them. And then suddenly there's not that many anymore. And yeah, they all got crushed, right?
Yeah.
So
many.
Wow. The second gen Camaro is finally having its day again, like for a long time they weren't really desirable. Those Melee's era cars in general are kind of having their day in the sun again.
Yeah, I think they're a neat car. They're really a cool looking car, but not as fast as most people expect them to be. Certainly not as fast as I expected them to be.
Right.
I know my second gen Camaro, when I bought it, it had the original smog era engine in it, and I think from factory it produced 195 horsepower with a 350.
Yeah.
And at the time I bought it, this is going to sound like a joke, but it's not. I had a minivan that would outrun it.
I believe it. I believe it. Well, I
Yeah.
think they were only about 6.5 to 1 compression on that. That engine was seriously detuned. Plus, it had
Yes.
all that really crude smog equipment on it. Yeah, they were not fast. Mustang, same thing, man. When they brought the V8 Mustang back with the Fox body, it was a dog.
Mm-hmm.
So for many years, for a good 10 years, I would say you didn't really there weren't really American performance cars as such as we would think of them. Those muscle cars from the 70s were not much, especially stuff like the Mustang II and the Chevy Vega. I mean, come on.
Yeah, they were super disappointing.
Super disappointing. But it was gas crisis years. Well, so are you mainly a muscle car guy? Is that your thing?
I'm into a little bit of everything, but something about the American V8 is just my style.
Oh yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah,
I love them.
Yeah, I like it a lot.
Mostly GM stuff. Is that your?
So mostly, but that's just by coincidence or happenstance. It's not because I think the GM motors are the best or anything like that, but every time I try to look at building a Ford or a Mopar, the money I'm going to get into versus what I get out of it, I just can't bring myself to do it.
Right.
So I've done a lot with the LS platform in the last 10 years. It's a big value platform.
Well, let's talk about that because, people have heard LS swap everything, and that's said as a joke, but kind of not, because it is so adaptable and it's cheap performance. So let's talk about the LS. First of all, what is a General Motors LS engine?
Well, that depends who you ask. But
right.
It's the generation of small block V8s they come out with in 98. They're all LSs to me, but a lot of guys will say the iron blocks are not LSs, but everything that bolts onto an aluminum block LS will bolt on with an iron block and vice versa.
Yeah, so basically it's the continuation of the small block, really. Just uprated and now aluminum versus cast iron, as you say. And there's many generations, or there are many LSs within
your LS1, which is a 5.7. You've got your 4.8s, your 5.3s, 6.0s, now 6.2s.
Right.
Now they've moved on to LTs, which are direct injected.
Right.
And quite a bit better, but still a lot more money for what you get.
10 years ago, you could pretty much go to the pick your part and pull one for really cheap, but everybody knows about that. So there aren't as many in junkyards.
Yeah, and we did that to ourselves. As a matter of fact, I spent a few years playing with the whole cheap turbo LS thing where you use a stock bottom end and you just abuse it and you don't care if it blows up.
You do it on purpose sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. There's a lot of learning that goes into making a high horsepower car. Sometimes you just want to go out and be irresponsible, and it just is what it is. And, you could get another one for $400 at the scrapyard.
Sometimes you want to just see what would happen if you ran it out of oil.
Yeah, well, sometimes it can't handle that much boost, but it probably will once, right?
At least once before you put a rod through the side of the block, right? That's awesome. So did you just start turning wrenches in your garage when you were younger, and are you self-taught?
Basically, I mean, I've learned a lot on YouTube like everybody else from my generation, but I basically just started out with a general interest in cars, and I moved out on my own at 18. I was too broke to afford somebody else to work on it, so I kind of had to. But just learned over time, and the projects got bigger over time, and the budget got bigger over time. That ended up where we are today.
And along the way, you collect certain tools, like tools maybe that you'll only use once every 3 years, like a special puller or, brake flare kits and all kinds of weird stuff, right?
I'm a big advocate for, if you can pay someone to do it or you can buy the tool to do it, just go ahead and buy the tool. And and then, it's free next time.
Yeah, yeah, and you can amortize that over multiple projects.
Absolutely.
Do you weld? Do you fabricate stuff?
Not very well, but I do it.
Passable, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It never looks pretty, but it always holds.
There you go. Hey, that's what grinders and paint are for.
That's exactly right.
So clearly you know your way around a car mechanically, but a Prius, I mean, there's a lot to take out before you can put anything in. And it's not just a matter of, you had to reconfigure this car because it's a front wheel drive car, first of all. So, and you want it to be rear wheel drive. Was this the kind of project where you're having beers with your buddies and somebody made a bet, or what? How did this start?
Well, this was the kind of project where I had joked around about it for years. I had kind of talked about, oh, that would be a really cool sleeper. I'll probably do that someday. And then one day, me and the buddies were sitting around in the shop, just cruising Facebook Marketplace, and they're about an hour away from me. There's this Prius, $500 sitting in some guy's pasture, and it doesn't run. And my wife was there, and she said, "You need to go buy that." And I thought, "Oh, I don't know. I've got all these other projects going. I'll do it another time." And she basically made me go buy this Prius.
Wow, she's a keeper.
So, yeah, she is. She definitely supports my hot rod habit. Yeah, so we went up, picked it up, and just started tearing it apart. I like to use the anecdote that I heard from a wood carver one time. I asked him, "How do you carve this bear out of this log? Like, how do you do that?" And he says, "Oh, I just cut away everything that doesn't look like a bear." So I just started cutting away everything that didn't look like a V8 Prius.
So where'd you start?
I got the Prius motor out, and I left the front subframe in. And I was thinking, okay, I think I can make this work with a front sump pan. And then I start, looking at the rear end and measuring it, and I have no idea what I'm going to use for a rear end. So I just say, I'm just going to start. And initially, the budget for this project was like $4 or $5 grand. I was going to do it super cheap, and even if it was terrible, hey, I've got a V8 Prius.
Yeah, right.
So I took a dummy motor and transmission and just started putting it in, seeing what was in the way, cutting it out, retest fitting, and I ended up cutting a considerable amount out of the car. And by the time I got the transmission tunnel built and the drive shaft tunnel built, and I got the rear end all in, and I said, this is so much fab work. When I put the real motor and trans in, I'm not going cheap.
Right.
I'm going to do something good because I need to make this worth it. This was just an obsession that basically consumed my free time for about 9 months.
Well, at a certain point, you must have realized this car is going to get so much attention that it's going to be really embarrassing if, I drop a drive shaft or the car won't start or she just doesn't run like she's supposed to. Like, your reputation's kind of on the line in a bizarre way.
Yeah, I don't know. I had the car sitting on the ground before I realized this is going to actually be pretty good. And so I need to put more effort into it.
Right.
Because, yeah, like you said, everybody's going to want a piece of this. Everybody's going to expect it to be good. So it kind of needs to be.
I like the fact, too, that the car is still grandma gold. You haven't put a flashy paint job or anything on it. It's a sleeper, which is what you wanted.
Yeah. I figure it's not a sleeper if it doesn't look like a stock clapped out Prius.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, even if I made it look like a new Prius, it's still, to me, it wouldn't be good because, all these 10, 20-year-old economy cars, they're not treated nicely. They all look kind of beat up, and so you expect it to be beat up.
Sure. Yeah, you expect it to have a little bit of curb rash on the wheels and a couple dents and dings here and there, a stack of registration stickers on the license plate.
Yeah, of course.
So pulling the car apart, kind of assessing, and obviously you've got some fabrication work to do, but luckily you've got a lift, right?
Yes, sir.
Could you have done this project without a lift?
I doubt it. I don't know that would be possible. It's so much fab work, and there's so much of having to have the car suspended. it would have sat on jack stands for 6 years if I didn't have a lift.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't imagine doing it without. You got a pretty good sized shop.
Yeah, it's not new and it's not super nice, but it's pretty big.
Yeah. You got space, man. You got a lot more space than I do, which I'm jealous of.
Well, space is cheap in Oklahoma. You're in California, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Space is definitely more expensive where I'm at. But okay. So talk about getting the batteries out of this thing. Was that kind of weird?
It was strange. It wasn't as difficult as I expected it to be. I started looking at forums and videos and literature on how to do this safely, obviously, because I don't want to touch the wrong thing that's 300 or 400 volts and kill myself. There's actually just a single fuse you can pull out, and then everything high voltage is safe to touch. And the battery on a Prius, it's not like on your full EVs. The hybrid battery is pretty small. So I actually was able to pull it out of the car and just manhandle it by myself.
Oh, cool. Now, is there a used market for these parts, or are they just sitting on a pallet in the corner of your shop now?
Well, I tried to get rid of them. I couldn't get rid of a lot of the parts of it, and so I just gave them to a friend that does scrap iron. Some of the stuff I kept because it's cool. Like I kept the electric motors because they're just these, giant, really strong magnets that I don't know what I'm going to do with them, but they're cool.
Oh, you'll find something to do with them.
There's a huge market for the batteries. So what I ended up doing was I actually paid for more than the initial cost of the scrap car by separating the battery modules and selling them individually online. People will actually take, when they've got a bad battery, it's usually just one or two cells that are bad. And so they'll just, replace those modules. And you're good to go.
So selling the batteries paid for the car.
It did.
Nice. You're ahead of the game already.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk more about getting the drivetrain in. So we're going from a transverse mounted engine and electric motors. We're going to a traditional longitudinal V8 with a drive shaft and a rear differential. So you had to carve a transmission tunnel, right?
Yeah. I had to basically cut a slit down the center of the car. And I just was repeatedly, just meticulously test fitting the transmission and the engine, trying to decide how high or low I could fit it. And just cutting out a little bit at a time, trying not to take more than I had to. Because what I did to build the transmission tunnel, because I knew that if I wanted a full interior, this was going to have to be built very tight. I couldn't just, buy like a universal bent bell housing cover or nothing like that. I had to sit the transmission and engine in the car, and I took all the interior out. And then I just started building the transmission tunnel around the transmission with it in the car.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so,
no, that makes
sense.
sense.
There's no room.
Yeah. So you lost some footwell space, I'm guessing.
Very little,
okay.
Maybe an inch.
Okay. Well, that's not bad. I mean,
yeah.
One of the things you said on Instagram was you're kind of a 6'2", 250-pound gorilla, and you fit nicely in the Prius.
Yeah, the Prius, this is going to sound strange coming from a hot rodder. I actually like it. It's a well-designed, well-engineered car. It may not be everyone's cup of tea, but I can appreciate it for what it is. And they have made a very good use of a small amount of space. I don't feel cramped sitting in one.
Yeah. I got to tell you, Toyota is a terrific company. I mean, they build some great products, and there's a lot of thoughtfulness in a Toyota, as much as they are appliances in many cases. I've owned probably 4 Toyotas, maybe 5, and yeah, they've all been great. So I'm not surprised that the Prius grew on you.
Yeah, so I've owned 3 Priuses, including the V8 Prius.
Okay.
My first one I bought just really out of curiosity and wanting to learn. So at the time, I was flipping a lot of cars, buy something broken, fix it up, and sell it. But I had never worked on a hybrid, and I was interested in learning how. So I bought this high mileage Prius thinking, okay, there's nothing wrong now, but it'll break eventually, right? And I joined the Facebook groups for Priuses.
Nice.
And unlike every other Facebook group of a car I'd been a part of, it was just full of people not complaining about problems they had or asking for advice. It was full of people saying, my Prius hit 200,000 miles today, and I've never done anything but change the oil. And so I changed my brake pads because they were rusty today. Like, what on earth is with these cars? And, it just grew on me. We drove it a few years, and I just ended up liking it.
No, I think it's great. And that is an excellent point that you make. So many times you go on the forums and it's a support group for, there's almost you can almost feel the regret somebody has in spending a small fortune to keep these cars going, certain cars, I don't know. It's kind of fun in a weird way. It's not a car enthusiast thing. It's more of like a satisfaction for having made a wise purchase, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I've always said that I like the way the Prius rides. I like the way it handles. It doesn't have enough power. They need more power.
Well, you solved that problem.
Yeah, we did.
So let's talk more about re-engineering this thing and space considerations. One of the things you touched on earlier was clearancing the oil pan. And I'm trying to picture not only that, because there is a front subframe and everything, but also you got to worry about your fan. You got to put a radiator in this thing. All the ancillary systems, right? Power steering. You got to make sure that your steering column and box are not fouled. You've got exhaust manifolds to worry about, and then pipes to route. Let's talk about that part, because just the engine compartment alone is like, I would probably screw this up royally.
Well, you touched on power steering. Interestingly enough, the Prius has electronic power steering, and the power portion is inside the cab on the steering column. So I thought, wow, if I can make it work around all the steering components that are in there, well, that's one less thing I've got to worry about. That cuts so much time off the project. So I don't have to have a power steering pump. I don't have to worry about fitting that in there. I used a front sump oil pan. It's just an off-the-shelf part. You can get it from Moroso. And, that was the point that I set the motor in the Prius, and I realized this is actually going to work. I'm not going to have to completely re-engineer the chassis. I can do what I wanted, which was use as much of the Prius chassis as possible. As far as the radiator, I just bought what is labeled as an LS swap radiator that belongs in an S10.
I love it.
So an S10 radiator fits in a Prius.
Perfect. And are you leaning the radiator back so is it underneath the nose there?
Yeah, and interesting enough, I didn't have to lean it back.
Wow.
I didn't have room to lean it back. It's sitting straight up and down.
Nice. Where's the engine sitting in relation to the center line of the hubs? Like, is it biased front or rear?
It is biased rear only by a very small amount. The engine is almost centered on the hubs, but it's very slightly to the rear.
Okay.
Which is actually in stark contrast to what the original Prius setup was, because it had everything hanging off the front. Everything was in front of the hubs. So everyone's surprised when I tell them this. When I sat that car on the ground with the V8, with the transmission, full weight sitting on the ground, it sat a half-inch higher than stock.
Wow.
And it was heavier, but the weight was shifted further back.
Yeah, which is advantageous.
Yeah, it works pretty well.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so what would you say your LS weighs compared to all the guts of the car that were in it to start with? In other words, are you weighing less up front, more up front, or about the same?
So I'm weighing a little bit more up front, probably about 150 pounds more up front. But by the time you actually put it on the scales, the weight has shifted rearward,
Right.
but the engine and transmission weighs a bit more than what was up front initially.
Yeah.
It just sits more on the back wheels.
I mean, 150 pounds would be a lot if it is a race car, but in a street car, it's not even noticeable.
No, really not. I weighed the car at 3,400 pounds with me in it.
Okay.
So
nice.
It really doesn't weigh much more than a stock Prius.
And in terms of the front brakes, did the swap complicate that setup, or is it pretty much untouched?
Well, for the most part, it's untouched, but there was a slight complication in that the Prius doesn't use a vacuum booster. It uses a 12-volt electronic pump for a brake booster. I did leave that stock braking system intact, and much to my surprise, it works pretty well. I was fully anticipating to have to change it out for something, but I thought, I've got to try it. I'm not going to know if it works if I don't try it.
Yeah.
And it actually has two separate braking systems on the front and rear. So the front is your traditional boosted pedal pressure, but the rear is just done entirely off of an electronic switch when you press the pedal, and it just pumps braking pressure to the rear.
Interesting.
So it makes it interesting when you bleed brakes on it, because you just hold the pedal to the floor and it'll just pump. It'll just continuously pump until it senses enough pressure.
Wow, interesting. And when you do bleed it, do you feel that sponginess until you get all the air out, like when you're traditionally bleeding brakes, or?
You do on the front,
right,
since it is just a traditional boosted pedal.
But not in the back.
The rear is entirely brake-by-wire, which is unheard of. I had no idea.
Well, I mean, I'm demonstrating a lot of ignorance in this episode because I've never really paid much attention to the Prius.
No one does.
I mean, I don't dislike them. They're everywhere where I live, and probably a lot where you live too. And they've been very successful, popular cars. It's just, it's not an enthusiast car, so I don't really pay attention to it. But
you may be surprised how many Prius enthusiasts there are. You probably saw the video of Prius at the tail of the Dragon doing a burnout.
Yes.
So I was actually there for a Prius enthusiast meet. It's called Prius and the Dragon. And yeah, there are quite a few people that are really enthusiastic about their Prius.
Well, yes, I stand corrected. And of course, I mean the traditional enthusiast, like
that's fair.
The internal combustion enthusiast. But
yeah.
I will confess, I probably have avoided the Prius on purpose because I'm afraid I might like it a little too much. It is tempting to have an EV or a hybrid, if only for the convenience and the ease and the savings. But anyway, so I think particularly the new Prius, I really like the restyle. I think it looks awesome.
Oh yeah, the new Prius looks great. And I kind of feel like having a slow, boring daily kind of makes you appreciate your fun cars more. Because no matter what you drive, you get used to it. You get used to the power and the speed, and it starts to feel slow. At least it does for me. So I find that if I'm getting bored with my project cars, I'll go drive the stock Prius for a while, and all of a sudden, the fun ones are exciting again.
Yeah, no. You're absolutely right about that. And for years, I drove, kind of econobox dailies. Like I said, a lot of Toyotas over the years. The Prius SS, that's what you're calling it, right?
Yes.
By the way, did you come up with that nickname, or is that one of your buddies being funny?
I think that was someone in the comments of a TikTok. They come up with that, and I said, I like it. I'm going to roll with it.
Right on.
Yeah, it was actually a fan that made the Prius SS badge. He just messaged me and said, "Hey, I can 3D print you a badge that says Prius SS." I thought, let's do it. That's awesome.
I saw that. That's really cool. And you've resonated with people when they are like sending you stuff and they're all about what you're doing. That's really cool.
Yeah, I've been super surprised and super happy at how many people have loved what I've built. It does make you feel good.
Yeah. So what I was going to ask is the car is still normally aspirated, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any plans to put any boost on it?
Not in the immediate future, but the possibilities on the table. I will say this: when I built the engine, I put enough ring gap in it to boost it to the moon. So
yeah, you're planning ahead. Good man.
Yeah, so it's ready if we decide to.
What kind of horses are we talking about right now? What are this? Give us the specs of the car as it sits today.
So it is an iron block 6-liter LS, and it has a BTR max effort NA cam. I mean, just about the nastiest off the shelf cam you can buy. It has head work just done by me, which I don't really know what I'm doing.
Are you just talking like porting and polishing, that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's got small chambered heads, so it makes a little extra compression. So the exhaust setup is less than ideal. I was only able to fit shorty headers, and I had to fit them on backwards. So, right out the gate, I can only fit 2.5-inch exhaust on it, and it has to make a sharp U-turn right out the gate. So it's not ideal, but similar combinations I've seen on the dyno make 500 horsepower. I'm not going to say this one does, but it could.
Well, I'm glad you resisted any possible temptation to route the exhaust directly out of the hood.
Believe me, there was a lot of temptation for that.
I mean, I could see people doing that. Some people would just be like, screw it. This is what I'm going to do. It's too much work otherwise.
I understand the temptation to just route the exhaust out the hood because it was a lot of work to get a full exhaust on this car. I mean, first of all, everything is built so tight, there's no room to traditionally mount the exhaust. I can't have it on rubber hangers swinging around a little bit. There's no room for that. It'll just smack into the chassis and be terrible. The motor's solid mounted. The transmission's solid mounted. The exhaust is solid mounted.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, in a lot of places, it is touching the chassis because to make the car usable, I had to tuck the exhaust as much as I could.
Right. So with that, did you have to do a bunch of heat shielding along the way?
Not a whole lot. I mean, there was some that was already there, and I utilized that. And there's some places where I built the firewall and I just double walled it with an air gap, and it works pretty well.
Gotcha. So
we run into an X pipe and then straight out to some cutouts. Just a standard valve. We can go wide open or reroute through a Y pipe that goes through 2 mufflers and a catalyst. So when I flip the quiet switch, we run through a catalyst, so it's not stinking, which nobody's checking for it in my state, but that's part of the sleeper aesthetic. And I have 2 mufflers from a previous project that I deemed to be too quiet for a muscle car, and I put them both in a row. So I thought that's the quietest thing I could fit under there, and sure enough, whenever it's running and you're in traffic or out and about, nobody can tell. Matter of fact, I experimented with it for a while. I would drive it uptown. I would drive it to my job where people knew that I was working on a V8 Prius. I had talked to them about it, and nobody knew. I could tell people it's this one or it's the other one, and my 2 Priuses are not even the same color, but they're just that invisible and ignored that I could tell them it's one or the other, and they wouldn't know.
There you go, sleeper. By the way, if you did this in California, they would put you in prison. You'd be.
I have been told.
You would be on every news channel. It would be the trial of the century. They would just come unglued.
Yeah, I don't know. My Prius probably produces less emissions than a Prius that actually gets driven.
Oh, I have no doubt. I mean,
yeah.
Without getting too much into the whole EV debate and everything, you know what? I'm not even going to go here because we don't have to. Who cares, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's the important thing is we're having fun with this Prius V8. But okay, so The exhaust sounds like probably one of the biggest hurdles you had to overcome.
Yeah. The initial exhaust I built, because I had to build it twice. The first one I built, it hung down too low, and I spent so much time and effort making it a nice, pretty exhaust because at this point my videos were starting to catch a lot of traction, and I thought, oh my goodness, millions of people are going to see this. I need to make it pretty, and I tore it out from under the car. I hit a ledge and just crinkled up my beautiful exhaust, and so I had to rebuild it, but tighter and uglier.
Oh, tell me it wasn't stainless.
It was.
Oh man.
It was.
Oh man, not cheap.
No, definitely not cheap. That's part of the prototyping.
Yeah.
You're not always going to get it right the first time.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I'm thinking back. You said 2-inch diameter pipe, right?
2.5.
2.5. Okay, so
Yeah.
but still, were you worried that this engine wasn't going to be able to breathe?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably not ideal. An engine of that caliber should have probably dual 3-inch.
Right.
But you can fit what you can fit.
Yeah. So we talked about brakes. We talked about power steering, exhaust. The car's got AC still, right?
No,
Oh.
no. So the factory AC sat right where I built my transmission tunnel, and I couldn't find room under the dash to put AC. I could probably get like a Vintage Air.
I know the guys at Vintage Air. Rick Love of Vintage Air has been on the show. I'll see if I can hook you up.
Oh, awesome.
I think this is a kind of a project that they could maybe get some mileage out of. No pun intended, but I mean, like, It would be kind of a cool promotional thing for them. We can even fit our units in a Prius, and not just any Prius, but the Prius SS. Seriously, I'm going to hit Rick up and tell him about this. I hope he'll probably listen to the show.
Awesome.
So.
Awesome. Well, nothing vintage about my car, but
So all the pieces of the puzzle are starting to fall into place, but you still got to get power to the rear wheels. So how did you accomplish that?
Well, like I said to begin with, I had no idea what I was going to put under the rear end to make it work and make it still look like a Prius. There are a lot of options that I could put there, but they wouldn't look right. So I spent a couple of months probably just, randomly a car will pop into my head and I'll think, oh, what's the width of that rear end? And what's that rear subframe look like? And I went through every car I could think of. And then a buddy of mine was LS swapping a Mark III Supra. And he had a couple of parts cars. And he said, well, what about the subframe from one of these Mark IIIs? So I had him measure it. And it was the wrong bolt pattern for the Prius wheels, which I expect, but it come out about 3/4 of an inch too narrow, which is just the amount of room I needed to put wheel adapters on and put the stock wheels on, and it came out perfect within 1/4 of an inch. So that's how we settled on a Mark III Supra rear subframe. And now, it certainly was no small task getting it to fit under the car. So you've heard of, I'm sure you've maybe even done it, when people lower something to the extreme, like a pickup or a Suburban or something, they have to C-notch the frame.
Yes.
So I had never done this. I had heard of it, but I thought, well, I've never C-notched a frame. The Prius doesn't really have a frame, but it has a boxed section on the unibody. I said, I think I can C-notch that and get this rear end to fit up under there, because it's so much a different style of suspension than what was there to begin with. The Prius just has a straight bar straight across in the back that connects the wheels, almost like having a solid axle back there. And what we're fitting is, an entire subframe with independent rear suspension.
A-arms.
And I've got to have a place. Yeah, A-arms.
Coils.
It's a top A-arm. The bottom is just one piece. It's not an A shape, and it has trailing arms.
Okay.
I'm not sure if there's a name for that style, but that's what we got. So yeah, I had to make a lot of room for the upper control arms. So we cut a large section out of the back of that car and rebuilt the frame in a C-notch. believe me, that was a nerve-wracking thing. I'm not an engineer. I didn't know if this was going to work at all. I just I said I'm going to have to overbuild it because I don't know if it's going to work. So let's build it really strong.
Okay, so once you got the rear suspension figured out, and now you know you've got power to the wheels, right? So we're talking about an automatic transmission, right?
Correct. Yeah, it is a 4L60E, which in my many LS swaps, I always jump straight for the 4L80E just because it's stronger, it's a better transmission, it's not going to give problems. But on this car, I wanted to save as much weight and as much rotating mass as possible, so I went with the 4L60E.
What was it like driving the car for the first time?
Oh, well, it was nerve-wracking because I I have never really done a lot of extensive chassis work, so I really didn't know what I was doing until I did it. So I was nervous that the car was going to come apart. It didn't. It held, and it was just a pleasure to drive. It's just completely violent and unhinged one moment, and then you flip the cutouts closed and it's just silent as the grave and very chill. But it's definitely a strange feeling because you still feel like you're sitting in a Prius, and you're not mentally prepared for what it can do.
Right. So, did you take it easy the first time? Were you just kind of driving around town like grandma's in the passenger seat, or did you put your foot in it right away?
I didn't even get it out of the shop, and I was doing a burnout on the rev limiter.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah, this poor car. People ask me all the time, what kind of gas mileage does it get? Because it's still a very aerodynamic car. It should be pretty efficient. I tell them, I don't know. I didn't build it to cruise. I built it to beat on it. I built it to do burnouts and go uptown and get ice cream.
Good for you. All right, you mentioned the Dragon.
Oh, the Dragon. That was fun.
Let's talk about the Dragon. So people may have heard of the Dragon. They see it online, but it's basically a very windy road on like the North Carolina-Tennessee state line, right?
Yeah, it's a destination for car enthusiasts, for motorcycle enthusiasts. Polar opposite of what I'm used to driving on.
Right. Yeah.
We don't have curves out here.
Yeah. So the Dragon's got something like 300 curves in, I don't know, an 11 or 12 mile stretch, something like that. And
yeah,
I have not been on it myself. I've only seen it online, but I constantly see motorcyclists going into a turn too fast, getting target fixated, and then dumping it over the side. It
happens a lot.
A lot. And so you go there with a bunch of Prius enthusiasts.
We did. So the Dragon is the complete polar opposite of what I had in mind when I built the V8 Prius. I have a 10-inch, 4,000 RPM stall converter, which is going to produce a lot of heat. And, when you're thinking straight line acceleration, you're thinking, I'm going to be on the gas for 10 seconds and then we're done. The Dragon was not that way. I mean, you could cruise it, sure, but, you don't hop into V8 Prius just to cruise it. So, 318 curves, and I gunned it on the exit of every single one. And I said, if I can make it through this without anything breaking or overheating, then as far as I'm concerned, the car's proven.
There you go.
And that's what we did. And the people's reactions there were absolutely priceless. I'd be cruising with the cutouts closed, and people were videoing a parade, because there was a parade of cars, an event called Wookiee in the Woods. It's for, VR6 owners, the popular Volkswagen engine. And people would be videoing this line of Volkswagens, and then they'd see my clapped out Prius coming. They dropped their phone, and I'd flip the loud switch and just, make some 11s. And they were, struggling to get their phone back out. And we did it a couple dozen times. It was fun.
Leave them in the tire smoke.
Yeah, very unsuspecting.
You can definitely spin the tires pretty much in any gear in that thing, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Especially since I'm still running, normal Prius tires. I've yet to put a good tire on it.
So there had to have been some people who really hated this idea. What were the reactions that you got?
So online, that was one of the first places I started posting this car, was in a Facebook group for Prius modifications. Well, that's a modification if I've ever seen one. And, there's a handful of people online that are going to have their negative comments, and, the extreme green crowd that doesn't like to see that sort of thing. But for the most part, the reception from the Prius community was overwhelmingly good, and especially in person. I don't think I heard one negative comment. It's not like online where everyone has negative comments.
Right. Had you driven the Dragon before you took the Prius on it?
No, that was my first time out there. It had been a bucket list item of mine for years, ever since I learned what the Dragon was. And it took a Prius enthusiast group inviting me out there to get me out there. And now we've decided we like it so much out there, we're going to go back every year. And we're going to go to this Prius meetup and drive the Dragon. And, we bring a trailer, bring all our motorcycles, go out there, have fun with the Prius, have fun with the bikes. It's a great area.
Awesome. Has anyone approached you and said, "Hey, I want to do this to my Prius. Can you help me out?"
A few, actually.
Yeah.
There's been people, comment or message online asking, for details of how I did this or that. And, I'll share the details, but, ultimately everyone's going to do a project of this caliber a little differently.
Sure.
So I'm curious to see if some of these actually come to fruition, and what these people do differently than I did. The second and third V8 Priuses will probably be better than the first.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's cool that, the car is still usable as a daily. Like, you haven't made this unhinged beast that you can't really just drive normally. And I think that's really cool that you've managed to build a car that is pretty much, it's a beast when you want it to be, and otherwise it's just fine.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little vibration, a little noise in the cab from the solid mounted engine, but other than that, it just drives like a normal car.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how much you've spent on this?
I do. I used creative accounting for a long time, but I did save all the receipts, and I ended up with about $12,000 in it to get to where it is now.
That's a respectable number.
I think so. I mean, it's over double of what the original budget was.
Of course it is.
But
yeah.
You know how these things go.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, some of these projects, I feel like if you knew what you were going to spend to begin with, you may not ever do it.
Oh, that's for sure.
You have to start out optimistic to make it happen.
Yep, absolutely. Brant, if people want to catch up with you online and kind of see this project for themselves, where do you want to send them?
My TikTok is where I post primarily, and my name on there is Just Ain't Care. But if you search for V8 Prius on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube, you'll find me.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll put a link in the show notes so people can just click on that. But listen, man, it was really fun to talk to you, and I would love to be able to see this thing in person someday. I can imagine that there's going to be a Prius SS Part 2 coming. I mean, I don't know you, but I suspect you can't leave well enough alone.
No, we're not going to stop here. It's going to keep going.
Awesome. Brant Stephenson, the V8 Prius guy. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
Maurice, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to meet you.
That's all for this episode of Horsepower Heritage. If you like what you've heard, share the show with your friends and become a patron at buymeacoffee.com/HP Heritage. Let's meet right back here in 2 weeks. That'll be Wednesday, June 5th, for more of the people and stories behind the machines. In the meantime, you can check out the Horsepower Heritage YouTube channel. Lots of great videos there for you, including the latest, which is about the Mullen Automotive Museum, which recently closed, and the fate of that collection. So until next time, I'm Maurice Merrick. Thanks for listening.